Liz Smith.
Thank you, and I'm sure it's very good to see the presiding officer back in the chair. What is not so good is the extraordinary late delivery that we received of what is an important budget statement, which I consider to be a discourtesy to Parliament. Now, in her very lengthy letter to the Chancellor on the 20th of November, the Deputy First Minister set out all her demands for the Scottish economy. Shona Robison wanted more money from the UK Government for public services, for increased capital investment for infrastructure, and more money for public sector pay increases. And she said, and I quote, "Businesses across Scotland have faced various challenges in recent years, so I encourage you to take action by using the reserved tax levers at your disposal to support them." Now, I have read that letter several times, and I can't see any acknowledgement anywhere, none whatsoever, that the Scottish Government takes any responsibility for the current fiscal circumstances in Scotland. Indeed, there was a complete abrogation of responsibility for the running of the Scottish economy, not just for this financial year, but for the last 16 years. And, presiding officer, that is not only disingenuous, but it will not wash with the public, because the current fiscal situation in Scotland reflects the policy decisions that have been made right here in Holyrood by the SNP all the time that they have been in government. And pandering to the Greens as well, most of the time, ministers have failed to improve public services. They have failed to undertake the public sector reform, which economists and analysts have been warning about for years, and they have failed miserably to grow the economy, thereby starving Scotland of much-needed revenue required to close the gap on the huge bills for public expenditure. Indeed, if the Scottish economy had grown at the same rate as the UK economy over the same time that the SNP had been in power, we'd have had a lot of extra billions to spend, just as we would have done if we hadn't had billions of taxpayers' money wasted on failed projects. So of course, the Scottish Government...
Miss Smith, if you might give me a moment. I must ask that we don't have shouting from the front bench. Members, let's hear one another in this important session. Miss Smith.
I think the First Minister is embarrassed by that, because the First Minister knows full well that the UK Government is having to help Scotland to be insured. And to ask the UK Government to use its tax levers to support business really does take the biscuit. Last year and this year, the UK Government decided, on top of all the furlough and the cost of living support in the pandemic, to give businesses 75% rates relief. But oh no, the Scottish Government refused to pass on these Barnett consequentials, with the exception, I think, this year for the islands. So my first question, Cabinet Secretary, even in line with your own demands to the Chancellor, why are you not supporting business more? And that's in line, I may say, with some of the comments from your backbenchers too. Secondly, and again with your backbenchers in mind, do you really think that by increasing the tax burden and also the income tax differential between Scotland and the UK, that you are sending out the right message that Scotland is open for business, for economic growth, for investment, for innovation and for job creation? Because it's abundantly clear that business and industry doesn't think so, Sir Tom Hunter included. And with regard to local government, which seems to be getting only a half of what they asked for, perhaps even less of a half of what they were asking for, does the Cabinet Secretary not accept that the long-term cuts which the SNP has imposed on core local government funding over many years could have been reversed for the next financial years if it cancelled its controversial National Care Service bill with all its spiralling costs and gave that money to frontline services which are more in line with the priorities of the people of Scotland?
Cabinet Secretary.
Can I also join Liz Smith in welcoming the presiding officer back to her seat. Can I also say my apologies for the late statement. More money for the public sector and more money for capital. I think we're quite modest asks of this UK government. The UK Tory Chancellor had £27 billion of fiscal headroom, but chose to deliver only tax cuts and no investment in public services. That is a political choice made by the Tory Chancellor, but not one that will be taken by this SNP government. The £1.5 billion, of course, that we have in addition to spend due to the tax decisions that we've taken here are the actions taken by this SNP government. And Liz Smith mentioning failed projects, I have to say to her, with the growing list of HS2, a failed Rwanda policy and the latest PPE scandal, I don't think that's something she should really bring to this chamber. In terms of the top three asks for business, of course, there are three concerns. The top three concerns are inflation, interest rates and energy costs, compounded by the decisions made by this UK government. In terms of the issues of tax, I have been very, very clear that the tax position is going to only impact on the highest earning 5% of taxpayers in 2024-25. And if you look at those earning around £28,850, that's 51% of Scottish taxpayers. They'll continue to pay less income tax in 2024-25 than if they lived elsewhere in the UK. And in terms of growing the economy, we have been very clear. I set out in my statement the actions that we were taking to grow the economy. And of course, since 2007, GDP per capita in Scotland has grown 10%, compared to 6.4% at the UK level. Average earnings in Scotland are now growing faster than in the UK. And next year we'll continue supporting investment that seizes the opportunities of our net zero transition and work with business and investors to launch a new green industrial strategy. So we'll get on with delivering what is a balanced budget, a budget that recognises the needs of public services first and foremost, but also households and the needs of business, presiding officer.